Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm going pretty well. And yes, I've ever since The Voice, I've kind of been mulling over a whole bunch of things, and hopefully today we can talk through an idea that I've been mulling over. Like it's one of those things where you don't know whether you've stumbled on something that people haven't considered before, or whether you're full of crap. So we'll find out where on that spectrum I am
We're
at.
about to find out.
Yes. And I guess what I want to broach today is the idea of what I'd like to call the niche paradox. So, what I was thinking about
Sounds sexy.
is, well, yeah. What I was thinking about is the whole idea of, well, when you consider, I guess, generally speaking, the left and the right, when you do think about things like left wing politics, the whole point of us is that it's politics for the many, and as
Hmm.
thus you're obviously always fighting for uh, the majority rule, or at least politics that are for the many. And what I wanted to kind of discuss today is, well, when you do have people that are jockeying for those kind of positions on the left, you have to neatly manage your identity as well as what you are fighting for. And I know the concept of infighting isn't, it is a fairly self explanatory thing.
Hmm.
But I think what's built into it is a paradox. And I kind of want to discuss that today.
So, what
So,
is the paradox of infighting, or
well,
like the
yes,
left?
because let's take for example the traditional, first international logic of,
Yeah,
you had Bakunin on one side, which was the anarchists, and you had Karl Marx on the other side, which were uh, the socialists that were fighting for wanting to take over state control.
yeah,
Let, let's
yeah,
let's take that. Um, Within their broad camps, if you will, they naturally had their own identity, and they had their own um, ideas of, how we're able to create politics for the many, to
yeah,
fight for the many.
yeah.
But in creating your politics, or at least creating your how you're going to fight for the many,
Hmm.
uh, you're basically breaking everything down into your own little box of how you should do everything from steps 1 to 10. But
Yeah.
because you've differentiated yourself against somebody else that says, well, actually, we should do steps 1 to 12 instead, um, that walks away from the majority. So in fighting, in basically what I wanted to explore today is, in fighting for the many, you're kind of trading that off with your identity of how things are uh, going to work, and because you are looking at a more identity way of doing things. So fighting in a smaller group
Hmm.
for things
Yeah.
that walks away from the majority. You basically get more granular and into smaller groups of how things should function, and
Hmm.
instead you advocate more and more for um, something that a smaller group of people uh, are advocating for,
Yeah.
and it's self defeating. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know whether I'm onto something, or whether I
Look, I don't know if this is not really a new conversation or like a new idea. There's always been kind of this understanding, I think, in the left that it's plagued with infighting, and the infighting is not the type of, let's say, um, it's not good competition in the sense that, like, people are competing against each other in some larger form of cooperation. And so because they're developing new theories and ideas, they can then push them all together and strive for the ultimate vision. Usually the infighting just dissolves into petty politics, and splits and tribalism and factions and all this sort of stuff, built usually around charismatic leaders, and people that can just pull a crowd in their direction and all that sort of stuff. But this is just the way, like you said, like talking about the international. Like, I think this is just a feature of the leftism that we know today, and like has been around since almost day dot. There are people, the leftist philosophy, if you're talking about it being something about being for the many, has always kind of, with that big ideal in hand, as a big vision, there's always going to be multiple ways to skin a cat. And so everybody has grandiose ideas on what's the best way to get there. And so, like, if you take it back to that kind of original conversation, or at least the conversation that was happening around the time of Marx, was like, yes, it's basically there were two camps, the anti-statists and then the pro-statists, so using the state as an apparatus to get change for the many, as opposed to those who just want to abolish the state altogether. And from there's been always a development of that argument. And more recently, I would say, especially since kind of the 60s, I think that's a very important turning point with, like, postmodernism and all that sort of stuff. The kind of the end game, and the working class kind of core of the leftist movement became less of an ideal in itself, and things started to split down the lines of pure identity politics, and chasing issues that didn't have anything to do with that kind of ultimate leftist agenda, which is the revolution of the working class and creating let's say creating a world in the image of working people, as opposed to being the image of a small and private minority. And so the left is very plagued and divided today around very particular political movements, whether that be things from climate change to sexual identification, and these type of matters only splinter people on the left further and further, because there's just an endless stream of political things that you can get involved with. And so that central idea that was holding leftists together in the past, like, pre-World War II and even like a few decades after it, that's gone. That's completely gone now, and we are lost in an endless sea of identity politics, and intersectionality and all these type of things. And it's funny because, it's paradoxical in the way that if you go back to the original kind of Marxian analysis of stuff, that sort of identity politics and all, like, the small issues where, like, I'm more oppressed than you are, and, like, look at all the layers of oppression that I go through, and so you just keep deep diving into all the different refractions of the issues that you could have, through all the various things that are plaguing society at the moment. Like, all of those things, a Marxist would say, would fall away, would melt away if you actually had a socialist revolution. Like, you wouldn't have the type of oppression that you have today. You wouldn't have the climate issues that you have today. You wouldn't have all the various problems that leftists like to fight over with the right, or just fight over amongst themselves. All those things would just disappear if you were able to complete the socialist revolution and move to communism and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it's paradoxical in the sense that infighting is completely antithetical to the original vision of what it meant to be left. And that's why I don't think the left actually exists today. Like, when people describe themselves as left, it can be from any range of things, which is just always taking up an antithetical position to people that associate themselves on the right, So for whatever issue that is. So if like the right are being conservative in their approach to sexual liberation, then then they take up the contrary position to the conservatives. If the conservatives are being, I guess, rigid in their stance about vaccinations and they are anti-vaxxers, then the left takes up that position opposite to them. So I would say the left is less defined by an actual ethos there today, and it's actually just defined by what it opposes on the right, or it sees as fascist or degrading someone's chance to live in an equal society, and whatever that means. It's lost. It's lost.
Yes, but also, like, obviously I'm speaking in very general terms, but when we do talk about the right wing, like, obviously there are those aspects to right wing politics that probably do want to change the game, aka fascism. But I would say that I at least like in broad strokes, right wing politics wants to keep the status quo, or they have no problem with the status quo in broad terms. Like, once you do start advocating of, hey, things are bad the way they are, we need to change things, and we need to change things for the better. Like, the onus or the impetus is on you to not only prove, okay, how are they bad, but also what's your plan? Like, what is your idea of a better future? And, like, even going back to what I was saying before, like, let's potentially break things down to percentages. Maybe you have Group A that's you need more than 50% to get the majority. So say you have one Group A that's 20% of the population that agree with you, and then you have Group B that are like 19%, and everyone else that group brings up to that 51% are all little other factions. Like, immediately from that base, like, sure, things are quite easy when you talk about things like maybe climate change. I would say probably in 2023, in comparison to, say, 20 years ago, you have things like, say, in Australia, the Hunter Jobs Alliance, where you actually have working people that realize, hey, we need to change things, and we need to invest in renewable energies, because really fossil fuels or anything like that aren't going to be around for much longer. So you are seeing that kind of intersectionality between ordinary working people and also climate activists and that sort of thing. But that's the easy thing of that. Once there's intersectionality, everyone realizes that, they need to come together for the cause. But then when you're talking about everyone's grand plans, so going back to the socialists that wanted to take over the state and the anarchists that wanted to break things down, then there's naturally going to be a butting of heads. And but you need as many people.
There was always a shared vision in that.
Whoa.
Like, they both were arguing about what was the best way to get to the socialist, communist kind of end game. There was two distinct, let's just make it very kind of general for the point of this podcast.
Well, I was talking about the how, but yes, go on.
Yeah, they had two distinct ways of getting there. But like, they had a shared vision. There is no shared vision in the left today. And so because of the various niche ways of being a leftist, and like all the different types of leftism that you could get involved with, racial politics, sexual politics, climate politics, just to name a few, like those, all of those different things that you can get involved with. If, like I was saying before, if you're taking a Marxist analysis or an original socialist kind of position on this stuff, all of those matters are subordinate to the umbrella or the overarching issue, which is social liberation. And like, those things would all fall away, or they would be addressed in the ultimate goal. And so without having that ultimate goal in mind anymore, there is a paradox in the sense that all of these niches these infighting groups and cells and factions are destroying what it simply means to be on the left. And that is what you were talking about before, which was having a majority of the world's population in mind in decision making and trying to establish a world that creates that as its main focus. And that, like, the lack of that ultimate vision, I think, is problematic, essentially, and is being completely eroded day by day as people break into more and more niche little sections and splinter off into little cells and fight over what I think, and like I might get some heat for this, but are trivial matters when you think of the end game. Because if it is true that those things will be solved when looking at the end game, then we are focusing on the wrong stuff. And so, like, the main paradox, or if it's not really a paradox, I guess it's more like an irony of the left, is the fact that one of the core values of, like, leftism is solidarity.
Yeah.
Solidarity is supposed to be kind of the key to unleash the force that is behind the revolutionary potential of the left. Like, people would get behind certain elements because they knew it would lead to the larger goal, not because maybe they wholly believed in it. What was happening, if there was a protest or a strike against something, maybe they probably weren't even going to be affected by it, but they would get behind it in the name of solidarity. And where is the solidarity in this niche complex that you're talking about now, for us?
Well,
where is the solidarity?
Well, the funny thing is that I do think you raised some really good points there, but the solidarity that you were kind of talking about, I would say it's kind of been swept aside in people's minds, and it's only been retained in this kind of patriotic way. And what I mean by that is, let's take the classic example here in Australia, like Anzac Day and the whole concept of the idea of mateship and all of that. Like that whole idea, like I'm sure when workers were probably working at the coalface and probably within the mines and that sort of thing, solidarity where you are working blood, sweat, and tears next to your mate in the coal mines, like that sort of solidarity makes complete sense. But probably with the shift in technology and probably shifting to the technology age compared to the industrial age, which was the previous period, the only remnants of that sort of mateship that we have is sports and, our fathers or our grandfathers that fought in previous wars. Like there seems to be a disconnect, and there's very limited avenues for us to connect to that sort of solidarity unless you have strict relationships within the old solidarity frameworks, whether that's within a political party or whether that's within a union. But outside of that, there's a disconnect.
Look, the solidarity that I'm talking about is like the solidarity that doesn't require you to be in the coal mine with somebody else, or in the same workplace as somebody else, or sharing the same afflictions as somebody else directly. The solidarity I'm talking about is what happened to the general strike. So, like, when enough labour unions or groups of workers realised that there was one issue that was going on in this particular industry, all the industries would get together and say, look, in the name of solidarity, like, we're not fighting for something particular in this particular workplace or this sector of the economy, but like, we understand that we are greater, that we have greater power in numbers, and so to put enough pressure on the political establishment for change, then we will all stand together. And the general strike is the ultimate form of solidarity that I'm talking about. It transcends nations or transcends geographical locations. And people will say, all right, let's all stop work at the same time and bring the economy to a halt, because that's how you really hurt people with power or your economic elites, is when you stop the economic machine in whatever nation or across a series of nations. You grind that to a halt for a day or a week or whatever the time period is. But it requires a level of coordination and understanding and respect between different groups of people. And so, like, this kind of trivial showboating and virtue signaling that goes on in the left today, like, my issue's better than yours, and look how wonderful I am to bring this to the public eye. It's completely divisive, because people are just competing with one another to show how wonderful they are, how self-righteous that they can be. And like, the solidarity just doesn't exist. And without the solidarity, you're never going to overcome the niche paradox that you've aptly named here.
Well, yeah, but also I think what's also important is people have almost taken for granted the employer and employee relationship. They've been lulled into a well, I wouldn't say a false sense of security, but an ambivalence, if you will. Like, you know, you're either the employer or you're the employee, and every employee has their fight. Hey, if you've got a job today, and for whatever reason you become redundant tomorrow, then, you know, hopefully your union can help you out. But if not, then, you know, back to the reserve army for you, and hopefully you get another job. Like, I think with solidarity, you have to have an understanding that you have to completely fight the system, in the sense of, well, the employer is the person who has all the power. Sure, you know, we'd love to get to the stage of changing that relationship within society, which I think ultimately socialists are wanting. And at least the left side of politics are wanting to change the game in that regard. But
like,
until you can change...
Do they though? Like, what leftists like do you see today, or people that would describe themselves on the left, that actually want a social revolution, that actually believe that, like, you can stop the capitalist machine, or you can actually live in a society where workers control the means of production, or at least work in a democratic workplace? Most people that I talk to about that think it's rubbish. They actually believe that, or like, not believe, but like, they can't wrap their imaginations around the idea that you could have a workplace that is structured in a democratic way, instead of this totalitarian corporate structure that, like, kind of dictates the entire working arrangement of all the working people in the world, from the private sector to the government sector, whatever it is. It's all top-down stuff.
Well, maybe I wasn't explaining myself correctly, but what I was talking about is that time that you were referring to before, that when, say, for example, the coal miners decided to go on strike, it didn't matter what sort of industry you were in. The rest of the industries would be like, okay, we'll also go on strike, because that's what we should do. You know, your employer is being unfair to you, therefore we're going to make sure that all employers don't pull this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, that used to be the case, but now, you know, I guess I'm kind of agreeing with you, is that people have become complacent about the employer and employee relationship, and that is the best that they can manage. And because you have ceded that ground, that's the reason why you have a situation and this is especially in the case in the US, that you can just bring cheaper workers in, and then you can drive down wages, and then you can increase your profits, because you have bought in to the worlds of your Jeff Bezos, your Mark Zuckerbergs, and all the tech giants of, well, this is the best I can do for myself, so I will make with what my lot is. And if you completely cede that ground and think, well, there's no possible way we can move out of this employer-employee relationship when we had moved out of the slaver and the slave relationship. We have moved out of the feudal lord and the serf relationship. There's logic dictates that eventually we would move out of our current situation. But if you were able to convince everyone to believe this beautiful lie, if you will, then I guess nothing will change.
I think you used a good word before, the ambivalence of kind of the way that I guess the majority or the working people of the world are struck with today, especially in developed countries and first world nations that have been kind of plagued with in the developed nations, plagued with neoliberalism. Because what I think neoliberalism did really successfully was to convince working people that as long as they kind of looked inwardly and concentrated on their own self-interest, then they would be able to survive better in the world and be insulated from economic downturns and struggles in the economy and all that sort of stuff. And so the kind of macro story behind, or the superstructure that sits above the individualistic focus is then the privatization of all public goods. But what preceded neoliberalism and allowed it to happen, and what created that ambivalence, which was the bedrock then of the self-interested individual that came out of it, was the wins that working people got, with things like the New Deal and Keynesian economics. There was this big period after the Great Depression and after kind of World War II, where working people were kind of and they had enough solidarity and enough class consciousness at that time. And then they were well, look, if you really want to continue with this thing called capitalism, and in the way that it's unfolding today in the post-industrialized and heavy tech world, or high-tech world, sorry, we want a bigger share of the pie, and we want to get access to stuff. So we want things we want pensions, we want social services, we want secure work, we want to be able to have our kids go to college and university, we want free education, all this sort of stuff. And so when the capitalists were who were quite scared, of the revolution, at the end of kind of the turn from the 19th into the 20th century, David Graeber speaks about this place, I think it's Chicago, where all of the capitalists in Chicago, all the rich and economic elite, kind of lived in this big area and this big row, or in this residential estate. And at the end of the revolution of this estate is an army barracks. It's because these people saw the writing on the wall, especially after the Great Depression and stuff like that. They were basically writing off capitalism, and they were well, it's just a matter of time until the workers rise up and overthrow the system. And so they thought the safest place to be at that point would be next to the military establishment, so they could be protected when the workers come to feast on their flesh and all that sort of stuff. So there was this kind of this enthusiasm, this hope, and this massive drive that was happening at the end of the 19th century and moving into the 20th century. And people didn't think that capitalism was going to last forever. And then when they did kind of get placated or satiated with a larger slice of the pie to kind of calm them down, I think they, did become ambivalent. People got access to some of the niceties of the capitalist machine. And they kind of then were able to build a bit of wealth for themselves. That's kind of when you see the largest wealth redistribution in modern history happening is the end of World War II, when you have a real kind of mass creation of a stable and powerful middle class. Like before that, it was kind of like, 5 to 10% of the world's populations in every country owned, like more than 50% of the world. And then after World War II, you kind of have like, you have the middle class owning like 50% in its own right, and then maybe another kind of 30% going to the top 10% of people. And then you have like, the bottom fighting over like 10% of the scraps or something like that. But like there was this massive creation of middle classes in like, and I'm just talking about middle class from the perspective of wealth accumulation in the advanced countries. And these were working people. These weren't people that were like, professionals and intellectuals and in like the judiciary system and all that sort of stuff. They were kind of people with working backgrounds, but they were promised, thanks to initiatives from people like, Henry Ford and stuff like that, they were promised a decent working wage because they were then able to be better consumers and they were supported by proper social infrastructure. And yes, I do think that caused a feeling of ambivalence towards changing the machine because, they were now benefiting from it enough to keep them from fighting anymore. And with that, then there is no need for solidarity.
Yeah.
Because that comes from having a shared vision. Because like I don't agree with you on this one, but like I'll fight with you if you wanna struggle against the system on this issue.
Yeah.
Where is the let's struggle together sentiment in the left today?
Well, that was the reason why I mentioned intersectionality before. Is that it's very easy with something like climate change or even referendums like we recently had, but when you think of anything else, like you don't have to just look at progressive political parties. People are more than willing to go at each other's throats on a particular issue and fight over it, whether it's over the internet or even in general discussions. But you're right. Like I think unless you're in very specific circles, like I said, if you're part of a union, especially the management of a union, that uses solidarity in its ordinary lexicon, you wouldn't be familiar with the phrase at all in modern society.
Yeah, and that's a real shame because like without the understanding of the true essence of what solidarity means, like you really have nothing. And I would say then that the political establishment, economic elites, the status quo, they had won the arm wrestle, which was taking place quite dramatically over the last 100 to 200 years, and it's just been completely squashed because the only power that working people have is in their numbers.
Yeah.
And if it is completely like this type of niche paradox kind of stuff, this infighting, this division on the part of the working class that was conscious enough to want to unify enough people to get wins on the board, if they are now fighting amongst themselves, it's divide and conquer, and it has been conquered. Because as we were talking about before, the right don't have the same ethos and vision as people on the left. I think I disagree with some of the stuff you were saying before. I actually do think they want to see change. I think they're all about change, but like their movement is in the old form of revolution, which we've discussed before, the medieval sense of revolution, which is going back to a time before. So going full circle and going back to when times were nicer and there were less migrants around and people that like you don't like, and where life was simple and more traditional and all that sort of stuff. They yearn for the past, whereas left would yearn for the future. And so, yeah, they want to see change, all right, but it's just in a backwards direction, I would say. If you could kind of holistically and very generally look at the differences between the movement and the direction on which left and right minded people would see the world. But like the other kind of thing about solidarity is the recognition that solidarity doesn't just mean with other leftists. You have to understand, as a leftist, with the ability to understand, with the ability to see the bigger picture, that we are all working people, and the fact there is the idea of a left and a right is the first form of division of the working class. And because you can split them into two camps to begin with, then the battle will never be won in terms of from the perspective of working people. Because the last thing you want is them to all have the same backstory and to think that they're all the same. Because that's when the working class or majority of society is truly dangerous, when they're all angry about the same thing.
Yeah.
And they want to change it. And so as long as you have the division between left and right, then you will always be able to control people better. And the left should be able to see beyond that. It really annoys me when you have self-righteous lefties that are just attacking the right for the sake of attacking the right. And this is what I was talking about before, when I think the left only defines itself now in opposition to the right, which is wrong. It is wrong. You have to be able to understand, as a social revolutionary, or even just a leftist, if you want to call yourself that the people that you're hating on, the people on the right, are working people too. They are your brothers and sisters in arms, and without them, you will achieve nothing. So you might as well try and convert them to the cause, or paint pictures for them that they can understand, so they can see who the one true enemy is, and that's the establishment.
Well, maybe that's the thing that beats the niche paradox. Then is that we need a new vision, and obviously I'm borrowing here from good old Professor Richard Wolff, but maybe the thing to the thing to aspire to in terms of its vision is the establishment of the norm of worker co-ops, because really a worker co-op can challenge the employer and employee relationship. If you can establish a business, like obviously right now it would be competing in a capitalist market, but if you at least can show people, and maybe this might point to your point of solidarity, is that if you're able to build a market, even if it's a local market, or of where worker co-ops can actually work, then well, it doesn't matter whether you're an anarchist, it doesn't matter whether you're a democratic socialist, it probably doesn't matter if you're a liberal. If you're able to show to an ordinary working person that you can work together to produce, to consume, to do whatever you want with the profits on a Friday when you're all sitting around discussing what to do with the business, then you can show that there is a legitimate alternative. Because it's a point that Richard Wolff talks about all the time, is that even if you consider the socialist representations that have happened all throughout the 20th century until now, whether that's the Scandinavian countries, their ideas of socialists of, hey, you have the you kind of keep the capitalist market system, but we have a very progressive safety net and you have the market kind of working the way it is. You have, or that the Soviet interpretation of that, where they take them, the state takes the means of production, and you kind of go from there. Or you have uh, uh, socialism with Chinese characteristics, with everything that the CCP is doing, which is basically a mix of the two. You have state enterprises as well as private enterprises, so a mix of state as well as competing in the market system.
Yeah.
All of them, and this is a very good point by Richard Wolff, is all of them never touched the employer and employee relationship. Like, sure, the cooperatives as well as worker cooperatives do exist in those market societies, or planned economies, if you will, but the employer and employee relationship was never truly challenged. And maybe that's the vision we need in order to get to the next state. But
it's a long road for
it's
us.
a long road.
It's a long road. Like, if you look at the history of capitalism and how it like kind of developed out of feudalism, like you can pin that back to someone like, you know, Marx would say the 1300s or the 14th century, when people being forced off the land and like turned into wage workers. People can pin that back further than that to when the Italian bankers were first doing their thing and coercing like state apparatuses to do their bidding through supporting them financially and then trapping them in debt. And so, like, if you want to put a timeline on from when capitalism started to evolve into what you get around the time of the French Revolution, you know, that's like 400 years we're talking about there in that snapshot. And, like, it's not even full-blown capitalism at that point. It's kind of more early onset capitalism until you get to full-blown capitalism by the time you get closer to the Industrial Revolution. And so, like, if you're talking about an uprising happening within the economic mode, which is, you know, it's really, that's what Marx was talking about. That's historical materialism 101 right there. Yeah, if it's co-ops, which are the future of the social revolution, we're looking at a trajectory of, you know, a few hundred years at least before you can have enough agitation and expectation for a new class to rise and seek power for itself and influence change. So if that is truly the way for us, we got a long way to go, baby.
Yeah, well, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and like we've talked about this before on another podcast. It was probably a while ago now, but like, you know, I do have like a real feeling that, you know, that's probably the way to go. Like, all of these other socialist kind of experiments, as critiques like to call them, well, they really are. They really were experiments with the socialist labels stuck on them, that kind of thing. And especially if what you're talking about is true, and, like, you know, there's plenty of evidence to say it is. So, you know, old Richard Wolff ain't lying. A lot of these kind of these planned economy type societies that label themselves communist, they never resolved the most basic and fundamental principle of socialism, which was democratic workers' control. And like, even when they had them, or like places where they actually were built on like the back of the labor movement and the workers' movement, the first thing the new revolutionary governments did was to basically destroy those workers' councils and things like that, and give all the power back to some type of central bureaucracy, so the society could be planned and progressed properly.
Yeah.
So, like, even when you actually did have it, like, it was very, very momentary at best, fleeting, and then it was co-opted by the Red State, which is what your mate Buchanan was described it. He was very prescient in that regard, or Buchanan, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He saw it coming. He saw it coming.
Okay. Well, like, I'm getting a sense of, yeah, I probably wasn't. It wasn't a groundbreaking idea, the niche paradox, if you will, but maybe it was. Maybe it was a wrapping that hadn't been looked at before. Nobody put a name to it, but it's people have just referred to it as infighting, but not necessarily given it a name before. How about that?
Yeah. But like it's paradoxical in the sense that it is counterintuitive. Yes, it doesn't make sense when you think of if there is supposed to be an idea of progress and an ideal of like changing the system, then being niche, and um, yeah, like splintering off into factions is completely counterproductive. It's
Yeah,
antithetical to the idea of being on the left.
yeah, because if you want to grab the majority, but you keep on splintering off into smaller and smaller
Yeah.
groups, then
Yeah.
yeah,
My God,
it's self-defeating.
it's self-defeating. Yeah.
Okay. With that, the very last thing, what's that synthwave art? So the prompt for today was um, groups identifying their politics.
Right.
Uh,
So you've
uh,
got Aviated Man versus Fedora Man. There, both got similar glasses on them.
yeah, they've got cool shades. I think this is another one where I'm not sure where
I think
the
you're
artwork came from the prompt, but
yeah.
it is.
I think you're confusing the AI for us.
Yeah, I think I am as well.
Yeah. They continue to do that because unless we confuse the AI, then it's going to know us better than we know ourselves soon, and that's when it will take over. And all of this conversation that we're having will be pointless, to be honest, because yes, the AI revolution is coming, and humans will be redundant soon. Sorry, yes. Here's to that.
Cheers. And with that, everyone, we'll sign off. So remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And I'll hand it over to you, Mr. E.
Thank you very much, 4AS, and to all of you out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.